Chapter 3, in which there is a family reunion. Fat Charlie flew home to England, as home as he was going to get anyway. Rosie was waiting for him as he came out of the customs hall carrying a small suitcase and a large, taped-up cardboard box. She gave him a huge hug. "How was it?" she asked. He shrugged. "Could have been worse." "Well," she said, "at least you don't have to worry about him coming to the wedding and embarrassing you any more." "There is that." "My mum says that we ought to put off the wedding for a few months, just as a mark of respect." "Your mum just wants us to put off the wedding. Full stop." "Nonsense. She thinks you're quite a catch." "Your mother wouldn't describe a combination of Brad Pitt, Bill Gates, and Prince Williams as quite a catch. There is nobody walking the earth good enough to be her son-in-law." "She likes you," said Rosie, dutifully and without conviction. Rosie's mother did not like Fat Charlie, and everybody knew it. Rosie's mother was a high-strung bundle of barely thought-through prejudices, worries, and feuds. She lived in a magnificent flat in Wimpole Street, with nothing in the enormous fridge but bottles of vitaminized water and rye crackers. Wax fruit sat in the bowls on the antique sideboards, and was dusted twice a week. Fat Charlie had, on his first visits to Rosie's mother's place, taken a bite from one of the wax apples. He had been extremely nervous enough that he had picked up an apple, in his defense, an extremely realistic apple, and had bitten into it. Rosie had signed frantically. Fat Charlie spat out the lump of wax into his hand, and thought about pretending that he liked wax fruit, or that he'd just known all along and had just done it to be funny. However, Rosie's mother had raised an eyebrow, walked over, taken the remains of the apple from him, explained shortly just how much real wax fruit cost these days, if you could find it, and then dropped the apple into the bin. He sat on the sofa for the rest of the afternoon, with his mouth tasting like the inside of a candle, while Rosie's mother stared at him to ensure that he did not try to take another bite out of her precious wax fruit or attempt to gnaw on the leg of a Chippendale chair. There were large color photographs in silver frames on the sideboard of Rosie's mother's flat. Photographs of Rosie as a girl, and of Rosie's mother and father, and Fat Charlie had studied them intensely, looking for clues to the mystery that was Rosie. Her father, who had died when Rosie was 15, had been an enormous man. He had been first a cook, then a chef, then a restaurateur. He was perfectly turned out in every photograph, as if dressed by a wardrobe department before every shot, rotund and smiling, his arm always crooked for Rosie's mother to hold. "He was an amazing cook." "Oh, he was an amazing cook," Rosie said. In the photographs, Rosie's mother had been curvaceous and smiling. Now, 12 years on, she resembled a skeletal Eartha Kitt, and Fat Charlie had never seen her smile. "Does your mum ever cook?" Fat Charlie had asked, after that first time. "I don't know. I've never seen her cook anything." "What does she eat? I mean, she can't live on crackers and water." Rosie said, "I think she sends out for things." Fat Charlie thought it highly likely that Rosie's mum went out at night in bat form to suck the blood from the sleeping innocents. He had mentioned this theory to Rosie once, but she had failed to see the humor in it. Rosie's mother had told Rosie that she was certain that Fat Charlie was marrying her for her money. "What money?" asked Rosie. Rosie's mother gestured to the apartment, a gesture that took in the wax fruit, the antique furniture, the paintings on the walls, and pursed her lips. "But this is all yours," said Rosie, who lived on her wages working for a London charity, and her wages were not large, so to supplement them Rosie had dipped into the money that her father had left her in his will. It had paid for a small flat, which Rosie shared with a succession of Australians and New Zealanders, and for a second-hand VW Golf. "I won't live forever," sniffed her mother, in a way that implied that she had every intention of living forever, getting harder and thinner and more stone-like as she went, eating less and less until she would be able to live on nothing more than air and wax fruit and spite. Rosie, driving Fat Charlie home from Heathrow, decided that the subject should be changed. She said, "The water's gone off in my flat. It's out in the whole building." "Why's that, then?" Miss Klinger downstairs. She said something sprung a leak. Probably Miss Klinger. Charlie, so I was wondering, could I take a bath at your place tonight? Do you need me to sponge you down? Charlie. Sure, not a problem. Rosie stared at the back of the car in front of her. Then she took her hand off the gear stick and reached out and squeezed Fat Charlie's huge hand. We'll be married soon enough, she said. I know, said Fat Charlie. Well, she said, there'll be plenty of time for all that, won't there? Plenty, said Fat Charlie. You know what my mum once said, said Rosie. Was it something about bringing back hanging? It was not. She said that if a just married couple put a coin in a jar for every time they make love in their first year, and take a coin out for every time they make love in the years that follow, the jar will never be emptied. And this means... Well, she said, it's interesting, isn't it? I'll be over at 8 tonight with my rubber duck. How are you for towels? I'll bring my own towel. Fat Charlie did not believe it would be the end of the world if an occasional coin went into the jar before they tied the knot and sliced the wedding cake, but Rosie had her own opinions on the matter, and there the matter ended. The jar remained perfectly empty. The problem, Fat Charlie realized once he got home, with arriving back in London after a brief trip away, is that if you arrive in the early morning, there is nothing much to do for the rest of the day. Fat Charlie was a man who preferred to be working. He regarded lying on a sofa watching Countdown as a reminder of his interludes as a member of the unemployed. He decided that the sensible thing to do would be to go back to work a day early. In the Aldwych offices of the Graham Coates Agency, up on the 5th and topmost floor, he would feel part of the swim of things. There would be interesting conversation with his fellow workers in the tea room. The whole panoply of life would unfold before him, majestic in its tapestry, implacable and relentless in its industry. People would be pleased to see him. You're not back until tomorrow, said Annie the receptionist when Fat Charlie walked in. I told people you wouldn't be back until tomorrow, when they phoned. She was not amused. Couldn't keep away, said Fat Charlie. Obviously not, she said with a sniff. You should phone Maeve Livingstone back. She's been calling every day. I thought she was one of Graham Coates' people. Well, he wants you to talk to her. Hang on. She picked up the phone. Graham Coates came with both names. Not Mr. Coates, never just Graham. It was his agency, and it represented people, and it took a percentage of what they earned for the right to have that represent them. Fat Charlie went back to his office, which was a tiny room he shared with a number of filing cabinets. There was a yellow post-it note stuck to his computer screen with "See Me," GC, on it, so he went down the hall to Graham Coates' enormous office. The door was closed. He knocked, and then, unsure if he had heard anyone say anything or not, opened the door and put his head inside. The room was empty. There was nobody there. Hello, said Fat Charlie, not very loudly. There was no reply. There was a certain amount of disarrangement in the room, however. The bookcase was sticking out of the wall at a peculiar angle, and from the space behind it he could hear a thumping sound and what might have been hammering. He closed the door as quickly as he could, and went back to his desk. His telephone rang. He picked it up. Graham Coates here. Come and see me. This time Graham Coates was sitting behind his desk, and the bookcase was flat against the wall. He did not invite Fat Charlie to sit down. He was a middle-aged white man with a receding, very fair hair. If you happened to see Graham Coates and immediately found yourself thinking of an albino ferret in an expensive suit, you would not be the first. You're back with us, I see, said Graham Coates. As it were. Yes, said Fat Charlie. Then, because Graham Coates did not seem particularly pleased with Fat Charlie's early return, he added, Sorry. Graham Coates pinched his lips together, looked down at a paper on his desk, and looked up again. I was given to understand that you are not, in fact, returning it until tomorrow. Bit early, aren't we? Well, I got in this morning, from Florida. I thought I'd come in. Lots to do, show willing, if that's all right. Absitively, said Graham Coates. The word, a car crash between absolutely and positively, always set Fat Charlie's teeth on edge. It's your funeral. My father's, actually. A ferret-like neck twist. You're still using one of your sick days. Right. Maeve Livingstone. Worried widow of Morris? Needs reassurance, fair words, and fine promises. Rome was not built in a day. The actual business of sorting out Maeve's Livingstone's estate and getting money to her continues unabated. Phones me practically daily for hand-holding. Meanwhile, I turn the task over to you. Right, said Fat Charlie. So, no rest for the wicked. Another day, another dollar, said Graham Coates with a wag of his finger. Nose to the grindstone, suggested Fat Charlie. Shoulder to the wheel, said Graham Coates. Well, delightful chatting with you, but we both have much work to do. There was something about being in the vicinity of Graham Coates that always made Fat Charlie A. speak in cliches, and B. begin to daydream about huge black helicopters, first opening fire upon, and then dropping buckets of flaming napalm into the offices of the Graham Coates agency. Fat Charlie would not be in the office in those daydreams. He would be sitting in a chair outside a little cafe on the other side of the Aldwych, sipping a frothy coffee and occasionally cheering at an exceptionally well-flung bucket of napalm. From this, you would presume that there is little you need to know about Fat Charlie's employment, save that he was unhappy in it, and, in the main, you would be right. Fat Charlie had a facility for figures which kept him in work, and an awkwardness and a diffidence which kept him from pointing out to people what it was he actually did, and how much he actually did. All about him, Fat Charlie would see people ascending implacably to their levels of incompetence, while he remained in entry-level positions, performing essential functions until the day he rejoined the ranks of the unemployed and started watching daytime television again. He was never out of a job for long, but it had happened far too often in the last decade for Fat Charlie to feel particularly comfortable in any position. He did not, however, take it personally. He telephoned Maeve Livingstone, widow of Morris Livingstone, once the most famous short Yorkshire comedian in Britain, and a long-time client of the Graham Coates agency. Hello, he said. This is Charles Nancy from the accounts department of the Graham Coates agency. Oh, said a woman's voice on the other side of the line. I thought Graham would be phoning me himself. He's a bit tied up, so he's, delegated, said Fat Charlie. To me. So, can I help? I'm not sure. I was rather wondering, well, the bank manager was wondering, when the rest of the money from Morris's estate would be coming through. Graham Coates explained to me the last time, well, I think it was the last time when we spoke, that it was invested. I mean, I understand that these things take time. He said otherwise I could lose a lot of money. Well, said Fat Charlie, I know he's on it, but these things do take time. Yes, she said, I suppose they must do. I called the BBC and they said they'd made several payments since Morris's death. You know, they've released the whole Morris Livingstone, I presume, on DVD now, and they're bringing out both series of short back and sides for Christmas. I don't know, admitted Fat Charlie, but I'm sure Graham Coates does. He's always on top of that kind of thing. I had to buy my own DVD, she said, wistfully. Still, it brought it all back. The roar of the grease paint, the smell of the BBC Club, made me miss the spotlight, I can tell you that for nothing. That was how I met Morris, you know. I was a dancer. I had my own career. Fat Charlie told her that he'd let Graham Coates know that her bank manager was a bit concerned, and he put down the phone. He wondered how anyone could ever miss the spotlight. In Fat Charlie's worst nightmares, a spotlight shone down upon him from a dark sky onto a wide stage, and unseen figures would try and force Fat Charlie to stand in the spotlight and sing. And no matter how far or how fast he ran, or how well he hid, they would find him and drag him back onto the stage in front of dozens of expectant faces. He would always awake before he actually had to sing, sweating and trembling, his heart beating a cannonade in his chest. A day's work passed. Fat Charlie had worked there almost 2 years. He'd been there longer than anyone except Graham Coates himself, for the staff turnover at the Graham Coates agency tended to be high. And still, nobody had been pleased to see him. Fat Charlie would sometimes sit at his desk and stare out of the window as the loveless gray rain rattled against the glass, and he would imagine himself on a tropical beach somewhere, with the breakers crashing from an impossibly blue sea onto the impossibly yellow sands. Often, Fat Charlie would wonder if the people on the beach in his imagination, watching the white fingers of the waves as they wriggled towards the shore, listening to the tropical birds whistling in the palm trees, whether they ever dreamed of being in England, in the rain, in a cupboard-sized room in a fifth-floor office, a safe distance from the dullness of the pure golden sand, and the hellish boredom of a day so perfect that not even a creamy drink containing slightly too much rum and a red paper umbrella could do anything to alleviate it. It comforted him. He stopped at the off-license on the way home and bought a bottle of German white wine and a patchouli-scented candle from the tiny supermarket next door, and picked up a pizza from the pizza place nearby. Rosie phoned from her yoga class at 7:30 p.m. to let him know that she was going to be a little late, and then from her car at 8 p.m. to let him know she was stuck in traffic, at 9:15 to let him know that she was just now around the corner, by which time Fat Charlie had drunk most of the bottle of white wine on his own, and consumed all but one lonely triangle of pizza. Later, he wondered if it was the wine that made him say it. Rosie arrived at 7:20 with towels and a Tesco's bag filled with shampoos, soaps, and a large pot of hair mayonnaise. She said no, briskly but cheerfully, to a glass of white wine and the slice of pizza she had, she explained, eaten in the traffic jam. She had ordered in. So, Fat Charlie sat in the kitchen and poured himself the final glass of white wine, and picked the cheese and pepperoni from the top of the cold pizza, while Rosie went off to run the bath and then started, suddenly and quite loudly, to scream. Fat Charlie made it to the bathroom before the first scream had finished dying away, and, while Rosie was filling her lungs with the second. He was convinced that he would find her dripping with blood. To his surprise and relief, she was not bleeding. She was wearing a blue bra and panties, and was pointing to the bath, in the center of which sat a large brown garden spire. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "It took me by surprise." "They can do that," said Fat Charlie. "I'll just wash it away." "Don't you dare," said Rosie, fiercely. "It's a living thing. Take it outside." "Right," said Fat Charlie. "I'll wait in the kitchen," she said. "Tell me when it's all over." When you have drunk an entire bottle of white wine, coaxing a rather skittish garden spider into a clear plastic tumbler using only an old birthday card becomes more of a challenge to hand-eye coordination than it is at any other time. A challenge that is not helped by a partially unclothed fiancée on the edge of hysterics, who, despite her announcement that she would wait in the kitchen, is instead leaning over your shoulder and offering advice. But soon enough, despite the help, he had the spider inside the tumbler, the mouth of which was firmly covered by a card from an old school friend, which told him that "you are only as old as you feel," and on the inside, humorously topped with this, "So stop feeling yourself, you sex maniac. Happy birthday." He took the spider downstairs and out the front door, into the tiny front garden, which consisted of a hedge for people to throw up in, and several large flagstones with grass growing up between them. He held the tumbler up. In the yellow sodium light, the spider was black. He imagined it was staring at him. "Sorry about that," he said to the spider, and, white wine sloshing comfortably around inside him, he said it aloud. He put the card and the tumbler down on a cracked flagstone, and he lifted the tumbler and waited for the spider to scuttle away. Instead, it simply sat, unmoving, on the face of the cheerful cartoon teddy bear on the birthday card. The man and the spider regarded each other. Something that Mrs. Higgler had said to him came then, and the words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Perhaps it was the devil in him. Probably it was the alcohol. "If you see my brother," said Fat Charlie to the spider, "tell him he ought to come by and say hello." The spider remained where it was, and raised one leg, almost as if it were thinking it over, and then scuttled across the flagstone towards the hedge and was gone. Rosie had her bath, and she gave Fat Charlie a lingering peck on the cheek, and she went home. Fat Charlie turned on the TV, but he found himself nodding, so he turned it off, and went to bed, where he dreamed a dream of such vividness and peculiarity that it would remain with him for the rest of his life. One way you know something is a dream is that you are somewhere you have never been in real life. Fat Charlie had never been to California. He had never been to Beverly Hills. He had seen it, though, in movies and on television, to feel a comfortable thrill of recognition. A party was going on. The lights of Los Angeles glimmered and twinkled beneath them. The people at the party seemed to divide neatly into ones with the silver plates, covered with perfect canapes, and the ones who picked things off the silver plates, or who declined to. The ones who were being fed moved around the huge house gossiping, smiling, talking, each as certain of his or her relative importance in the world of Hollywood, just as were the courtiers in the court of ancient Japan. And, just as in the ancient Japanese court, each of them was certain that, just one rung up the ladder, they would be safe. There were actors who wished to be stars, stars who wanted to be independent producers who craved the safety of a studio job, directors who wanted to be stars, studio bosses who wanted to be the bosses of other, less precarious studios, studio lawyers who just wanted to be liked for themselves, or, failing that, just wanted to be liked. In Fat Charlie's dream, he could see himself from the inside and outside at the same time, and he was not himself. In Fat Charlie's usual dreams, he was probably just sitting down for an exam on double-entry bookkeeping that he had forgotten to study for, in circumstances which certainly that which he finally stood up would discover that he had somehow neglected to put anything on below the waist when he got dressed that morning. In his dreams, Fat Charlie was himself, only clumsier. Not in this dream. In this dream, Fat Charlie was cool, and beyond cool. He was slick, he was fly, he was smart. He was the only person at the party without a silver tray who had not received an invitation. And this was something that was a source of astonishment to the sleeping Fat Charlie, who could think of nothing more embarrassing than being anywhere without an invitation. He was having a marvelous time. He told each person who asked him there a different story about who he was and why he was there. After an hour, most of the people at the party were convinced that he was the representative of a foreign investment house, seeking to buy outright one of the studios. And after another half an hour, it was common knowledge at the party that he would be putting in a bid for Paramount. His laughter was raucous and infectious, and he seemed to be having a better time than any of the other people at the party, that was for certain. He instructed the barman in the preparation of a cocktail he called a double entendre, in which it seemed to begin with a base of champagne, he explained, was actually scientifically non-alcoholic. It contained a splash of this and a splash of that until it went a vivid purple color, and he handed them out to the partygoers, pressing them upon with joy and enthusiasm until even the people who had been sipping fizzy water warily, as if it might go off, were knocking back the purple drinks with pleasure. And then, with the logic of dreams, he was leading them all down to the pool, and was proposing to teach them the trick of walking on water. It was all a matter of confidence, and he told them, of attitude, of attack, of knowing how to do it. And it seemed to the people at the party that walking on the water would be a very fine trick to master, something they had always known how to do, deep down in their souls, but they had forgotten, and that this man would remind them of the technique of it. "Take off your shoes," he said to them. So they took off their shoes. Sergio Rossi's and Christian Louboutin's and Rene Calvilla's lined up side by side with Nike's and Doc Martens and anonymous black leather agent shoes, as he led them in a sort of conga line around the side of the swimming pool and then out onto its surface. The water was cool to the touch, and it quivered, like thick jelly, under their feet. Some women and several men tittered at this, and a couple of the younger agents began jumping up and down on the surface of the pool, like children at a bouncy castle. Far below them, the lights of Los Angeles shone through the smog, like distant galaxies. Soon, Every inch of the pool was taken up with partygoers, standing, dancing, shaking, or bouncing up and down on the water. The press of the crowd was so strong that the fly guy, the Charlie in his dream, stepped back from the concrete poolside to take a falafel sashimi bite from the silver plate. A spider dropped down from the jasmine plant onto the fly guy's shoulder. It scuttled down his arm and onto the palm of his hand, where he greeted it with a delighted, "Hey." There was a silence, as if he was listening to something that the spider was saying, something only he could hear, and then he said, "Ask, and you shall receive. Ain't that the truth?" He placed the spider down, carefully, on a jasmine leaf, and at that self-same moment, each of the people standing barefoot on the surface of the swimming pool remembered that water was a liquid, and not a solid, and that there was a reason why people did not commonly walk, let alone dance, or even bounce on water, viz., its impossibility. There were the movers and the shakers of the dream machine, those people, and suddenly they were flailing, fully dressed in from 4 to 12 feet of water, wet, scrabbling, and terrified. Casually, the fly guy walked across the pool, treading on the heads of people, and walking on the hands of other people, never losing his balance. Then, when he reached the far end of the pool, where everything dropped into a steep hill, he took one huge jump and dove into the lights of Los Angeles at night, which shimmered and swallowed him like an ocean. The people in the pool scrambled out, angry, upset, confused, wet, and in some cases half drowned. It was early morning in South London. The light was blue-gray. Fat Charlie got out of bed, troubled by his dream, and walked to the window. The curtains were open. He could see the sunrise beginning, a huge blood orange of a morning sun that surrounded the gray clouds tinged with scarlet. It was the kind of sky that makes even the most prosaic person discover a deeply buried urge to start painting in oils. Fat Charlie looked at the sunrise. Red sky in the morning, he thought, a sailor's warning. His dream had been so strange, a party in Hollywood, the secret of walking on the water, and that man who was him and not him. Fat Charlie realized that he knew the man in his dream, knew him from somewhere, and he also realized that this would irritate him for the rest of the day if he let it, like a snag of dental floss caught between two teeth, or the precise difference between the words lubricious and lascivious. It would sit there, and it would irritate him. He stared out of the window. It was barely 6 in the morning, and the world was quiet. An early dog walker at the end of the road was encouraging a Pomeranian to defecate. A postman ambled from house to house and back to his red van. And then something moved on the pavement beneath his house, and Fat Charlie looked down. A man was standing by the hedge. When he saw that Fat Charlie, in pajamas, was looking down at him, he grinned and waved. A moment of recognition that shocked Fat Charlie to the core. He was familiar with both the grin and the wave, although he could not immediately see how. Something of the dream still hung about Fat Charlie's head, making him uncomfortable, making the world seem unreal. He rubbed his eyes, and now the person by the hedge was gone. Fat Charlie hoped that the man had moved on, wandered down the road in the remnants of the hanging morning mist, taking whatever awkwardness and irritants and madnesses he had brought away with him. And then the doorbell rang. Fat Charlie pulled on his dressing gown, and he went downstairs. He had never fastened the safety chain before opening a door, never in his life, but before he turned the handle he clicked the head of the chain into place, and he pulled the front door open 6 inches. "Morning?" he said, warily. The smile that came through the crack in the door could have illuminated a small village. "You called me and I came," said the stranger. "Now, you gonna open this door for me, Fat Charlie?" "Who are you?" As he said it, he knew where he had seen the man before. At his mother's funeral service, in the little chapel at the crematorium. That was the last time he had seen that smile. And he knew the answer, knew it even before the man could say the words. "I'm your brother," said the man. Fat Charlie closed the door. He slipped off the safety chain and opened the door all the way. The man was still there. Fat Charlie was not entirely sure how to greet a potentially imaginary brother he had not previously believed in, so they stood there, one on one side of the door, one on the other, until his brother said, "You can call me Spider. You gonna invite me in?" Yes, I am. Of course I am. Please, come in." Fat Charlie led the man upstairs. Impossible things happen. When they do happen, most people just deal with it. Today, like every day, roughly 5,000 people on the face of the planet will experience one chance in a million things, and not one of them will refuse to believe the evidence of their own senses. Most of them will say the equivalent in their own language of "funny old world, isn't it?" and just keep going. So while part of Fat Charlie was trying to come up with logical, sensible, sane explanations for what was going on, most of him was simply getting used to the idea that a brother he hadn't known he had was walking up the staircase behind him. They got to the kitchen and he stood there. "Would you like a cup of tea?" "Got any coffee?" "Only instant, I'm afraid." "That's fine." Fat Charlie turned on the kettle. "You come far, then?" And he asked, "Los Angeles." "How was the flight?" The man sat down at the kitchen table. Now he shrugged. It was the kind of shrug that could have meant anything. You planning on staying long?" "I haven't really given it much thought." The man, Spider, looked around Fat Charlie's kitchen as if he had never been in the kitchen before. "How do you take your coffee?" "Dark as night, sweet as sin." Fat Charlie put the mug down in front of him and passed him a sugar bowl. "Help yourself." While Spider spooned teaspoon after teaspoon of sugar into his coffee, Fat Charlie sat opposite him and stared. There was a family resemblance between the two men. That was unarguable, although that alone did not explain the intense feeling of familiarity that Fat Charlie felt on seeing Spider. His brother looked like Fat Charlie wished he'd looked in his mind. Unconstrained by the faintly disappointing fellow that he was, with monotonous regularity. In a bathroom mirror, Spider was taller, leaner, and cooler. He was wearing a black and scarlet leather jacket and black leather leggings, and he looked at home in them. Fat Charlie tried to remember if this was what the fly guy had been wearing in his dream. There was something larger than life about him. Simply being on the other side of the table to this man made Fat Charlie feel awkward and badly constructed, and slightly foolish. It wasn't the clothes Spider wore, but the knowledge that if Fat Charlie put them on, he would look as if he was wearing some kind of unconvincing drag. It wasn't the way Spider smiled, casually, delightedly, but Fat Charlie's cold, incontrovertible certainty that he himself could practice smiling in the mirror from now until the end of time, and never managed a single smile, one half so charming, so cocky, or so twinklingly debonair. "You were at Mum's cremation," said Fat Charlie. "I thought about coming over to talk to you after the service," said Spider. "I just wasn't certain that would be a good idea." "I wish you had." Fat Charlie thought of something. He said, "I wish I could have seen you at Dad's funeral." Spider said, "What?" "His funeral. It was in Florida, a couple of days ago." Spider shook his head. "He's not dead," he said. "I'm pretty sure I'd know if he's dead." "He's dead. I buried him. Well, I filled the grave. Ask Miss Higgler." Spider said, "How'd he die?" "Heart failure." "That doesn't mean anything. That just means he died." "Well, yes, he did." Spider had stopped smiling. Now he was staring down into his coffee as if he suspected he was going to be able to find an answer in there. "I ought to check this out," said Spider. "It's not that I don't believe you, but when it's your old man, even when your old man is my old man," and he made a face. Fat Charlie knew what that face meant. He had made it himself, from the inside, enough times, when the subject of his father came up. "Is she still living in the same place, next door to where we grew up?" "Miss Higgler? Yes, still there." "You don't have anything from there, do you? A picture? Maybe a photograph?" "I brought home a box of them." Fat Charlie had not opened the large cardboard box yet. It was still sitting in the hall. He carried the box into the kitchen and put it down on the table. He took a kitchen knife and cut the packing tape that surrounded it. Spider reached into the box with his thin fingers, rifling through the photographs like playing cards, until he pulled out one of their mother and Mrs. Higgler, sitting on Mrs. Higgler's porch 25 years earlier. Is that porch still there? Fat Charlie tried to remember. I think so, he said. Later, he was unable to remember whether the picture grew very big or Spider grew very small. He could have sworn that neither of those things had actually happened. Nevertheless, it was unarguable that Spider had walked into the photograph, and it had shimmered and rippled and swallowed him up. Fat Charlie rubbed his eyes. He was alone in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. There was a box filled with photographs and papers on the kitchen table, along with an empty mug, which he placed in the sink. He walked along the hall to his bedroom, lay down on his bed, and slept until the alarm went off at 7:15. And that's the end of the chapter.